Anna and Mark had a marriage built on routine, while Jason and Emily's relationship was held together by unspoken resentment. When Anna and Jason, her husband's colleague, began developing an emotional connection, what started as innocent conversations soon became something far more dangerous. As their bond deepened, secrets unraveled, trust was shattered, and all four found themselves forced to confront the truth about love, betrayal, and the choices that define them. In a tangled web of honesty and deception, passion and regret, each of them would have to decide, was it possible to rebuild, or was it time to walk away? Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The evening air carried the scent of rain as Anna stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars fall into earth. The dinner table behind her was set for two, though she knew Mark wouldn't be home for hours. He had texted earlier another late meeting. Another project. Another excuse. She sighed, pressing her fingertips against the cool glass. It had been months since they'd had a proper conversation, and even longer since she felt truly seen by him. Mark was a good man, a dedicated husband in the ways that mattered. He provided, he protected. But he was absent in the ways she craved. Across town, Mark sat in his office, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, the dim glow of his monitor casting sharp shadows on his face. He rubbed his temples and leaned back. "You should go home, man," Jason said, standing in the doorway. Mark's colleague and closest friend, Jason, had a knowing look in his eyes. "Anna's waiting." Mark exhaled. "She understands. It's just one of those weeks." Jason hesitated before stepping inside. "It's been more than a week, Mark." Mark ran a hand over his face. "I'm doing my best." "I know," Jason said, softer now. "But is it enough?" The following afternoon, Anna found herself at a cafe, stirring her cappuccino absently. The weight in her chest felt heavier today, though she couldn't name why. She was about to leave when she noticed someone familiar stepping inside. Jason. She had met him many times over the years at company parties, the occasional dinner. He was always charming, always polite. Jason spotted her and smiled. "Anna!" She returned the smile, though it felt foreign on her lips. "Hey, Jason. Mind if I join you?" She hesitated, then gestured to the chair across from her. "Of course." As he sat down, something shifted. The conversation started lightly: work, travel, the city. But somewhere between sips of coffee and shared laughter, Anna felt something she hadn't in a long time: warmth. "Mark's been keeping you busy," she said, a little too casually. Jason sighed. "Yeah, he has. But honestly, I don't know if it's about work anymore." Anna tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Jason hesitated, then shook his head. "Never mind. Just sometimes I wonder if he realizes how much he's missing." Anna's heart clenched. He wasn't just talking about work, and they both knew it. That night, Emily sat on the couch, scrolling absently through her phone. She knew Jason was working late again. She told herself it didn't bother her, that this was the life she had signed up for. But it did bother her. The distance between them had grown in ways she didn't understand. He was present, but distracted. Loving, but distant. She had tried to reach him, to ask him if everything was okay. The answers were always the same. "I'm just tired. Work's been a lot. We'll talk this weekend." Emily set her phone down and glanced at the framed wedding photo on the mantel. 5 years together. 5 years of love, of commitment, of promises whispered in the dark. So why did it feel like they were slipping away? Jason had intended to go straight home after work. But instead, he found himself texting Anna. "Are you still at the cafe?" Her response came quickly. "No, but I can be." He knew he should say no. He knew what this looked like. But he also knew that, for the first time in months, he felt understood. And that terrified him. Jason sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel as he read Anna's text again. "No, but I can be." He shouldn't go. He knew that. And yet, 10 minutes later, he was stepping into the cafe. Anna was already there, a fresh cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up when he approached, her expression unreadable. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Jason slid into the seat across from her, exhaling. "Neither was I." For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was heavy not just with words unspoken, but with the quiet acknowledgement of what they were doing. "You said something earlier," Anna said finally, stirring her coffee. "About Mark." About how much he's missing. Jason hesitated. He shouldn't have said that. But it was too late to take it back. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. I didn't mean to overstep. It's just, Mark's one of my best friends. But sometimes I feel like he's so caught up in his work that he doesn't see what's right in front of him. Anna let out a bitter laugh. You don't have to be careful with your words, Jason. I know exactly what you mean. He studied her, noting the tiredness in her eyes, the way she held herself like someone who had spent too long waiting for something that would never come. Have you talked to him about it? Anna sighed. I've tried, but Mark doesn't really talk. Not about things like this. He listens, nods, says he'll try. Then nothing changes. Jason ran a hand through his hair. He could relate. Emily and I are in a weird place too, he admitted, surprising even himself. Anna looked at him curiously. How so? She's been distant, he said. Or maybe I have. I don't even know anymore. We still love each other, but sometimes it feels like we're just going through the motions. Anna nodded, as if she understood too well. For a long moment, they sat in silence. Two people tethered by an unspoken truth, loneliness, even within a marriage. Back home, Emily glanced at the time. Jason had said he wouldn't be late, but here she was, alone again, staring at a half-empty dinner plate. She picked up her phone and called him. No answer. Frowning, she sent a text. Where are you? Minutes passed. No response. Something gnawed at her. Jason had been acting strange lately. Distant, distracted. And now, he wasn't even answering his phone. She didn't want to be the kind of wife who checked up on her husband. But tonight, she felt an urge she couldn't ignore. So she grabbed her keys and left. Anna glanced at the clock on the cafe wall. I should probably go soon. Jason nodded. Yeah, me too. Neither of them moved. Anna exhaled. I don't know why I texted you back. Jason gave her a small smile. I don't know why I came. And yet, here they were. There was no affair. No betrayal of touch. But there was something between them, a dangerous kind of understanding. A connection they weren't supposed to have. And just as Jason stood to leave, the bell over the cafe door jingled. Emily stepped inside. Her eyes found Jason instantly. Then they shifted to Anna. The look on her face was not anger. It was realization. And just like that, the boundary they had convinced themselves they weren't crossing had been crossed. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Jason stood halfway out of his seat, eyes locked on Emily's. Anna's fingers curled around her coffee cup, pearls hammering in her ears. Emily didn't speak. She didn't need to. The way her gaze flickered between them, the slow exhale as realization settled over her, was enough to make Jason's stomach twist. Emily, he started, but he didn't know what to say. She tilted her head slightly, as if piecing something together. I was worried about you, she said finally. Her voice was calm, controlled. Too controlled. Jason swallowed. I was just catching up with Anna. Emily finished for him. Anna flinched at the way her name sounded on Emily's lips. There was no accusation, but the weight of the moment made her shift uncomfortably in her seat. Emily let out a soft, humorless laugh. Wow. She shook her head. I wasn't sure what I'd find, but I think I get it now. Jason frowned. Emily, it's not what you think. Emily lifted a brow. Isn't it? Jason's hands curled into fists. He hated how this looked, how this felt. But more than that, he hated that he couldn't deny what Emily was seeing. Because deep down he knew. He knew that if he had found her sitting across from another man in a quiet cafe, speaking in hushed tones, eyes filled with something unspoken, he would have felt the same cold realization. This was betrayal. Maybe not in the traditional sense. Maybe not in a way that could be easily defined. But it was a betrayal nonetheless. And Emily knew it. I'll leave you too, she said, turning for the door. Emily, wait, Jason said, stepping forward. She hesitated, but she didn't turn around. I'm too tired, Jason, she murmured. Just come home when you're ready. The words hit harder than if she had yelled at him. Because it wasn't anger that she was giving him. It was resignation. Jason stood there, feeling the weight of everything unraveling. When he turned back, Anna was already looking down at the table, gripping her cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I should go, she whispered. Jason exhaled. Yeah, but neither of them moved. because they both knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of something far more complicated. Jason sat in his car outside his apartment, staring at the glow of the living room window. Emily was inside, waiting, processing. He should have gone in immediately, should have faced the storm he had caused. But he couldn't move. He replayed the scene at the cafe over and over in his head. The way Emily had looked at him, not with anger, not even with sadness, but with something worse, disappointment. That was what gutted him the most. Eventually, he forced himself out of the car. The hallway felt longer than usual, his steps too loud against the hardwood floor. When he entered, Emily was sitting on the couch, legs crossed, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't look up. Jason cleared his throat. "Hey!" No response. He hesitated, then walked closer, stopping a few feet away. "Emily, were you going to tell me?" Her voice was calm, eerily so. Jason rubbed the back of his neck. "There's nothing to tell." Emily let out a soft laugh, finally looking at him. "That's the part that scares me the most, Jason. That you really believe that." Jason sat down across from her. "I wasn't hiding anything." Emily raised a brow. "Then why didn't you tell me you were meeting Anna?" He opened his mouth, but no words came. Because she was right. He had hidden it. Emily sighed, swirling the wine in her glass. "I don't think you've done anything physical." "Not yet. But tell me this, Jason." She leaned forward, eyes locking onto his. "If I hadn't shown up tonight, would you have told me at all?" Jason swallowed. "I don't know." And that, right there, was the truth. Emily nodded, as if that answer alone told her everything she needed to know. "I should go to bed," she murmured, standing up. "Emily." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "I'm too tired to do this right now, Jason." "We both are." Then she walked away, leaving him alone with the silence. On the other side of town, Anna sat in bed, staring at the unread message on her phone. "Where are you?" Mark's text from hours ago. She hadn't answered. Now, at nearly midnight, she finally typed a response. "Home." She stared at the screen, waiting. After a moment, the dots appeared. "I'll be late. Don't wait up." Anna exhaled, tossing the phone onto the nightstand. It was almost funny. Here she was, drowning in guilt over a single conversation with Jason, while her own husband couldn't even be bothered to ask how her night was. She climbed under the covers, but sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Emily's face in the cafe. The raw moment of realization. Emily had known. She had seen what Anna and Jason hadn't been ready to admit. This was more than just a friendship. Jason woke to the smell of coffee. It was a familiar scent, comforting even, but when he walked into the kitchen and saw Emily standing at the counter, he felt anything but comforted. She was dressed for work, moving with quiet efficiency as she poured herself a cup. Jason cleared his throat. "Morning." She didn't look up. "There's coffee if you want some." The distance between them was unbearable. Jason walked closer, leaning against the counter. "Emily, about last night." "I don't want to talk about it right now," she interrupted. "Emily." She finally met his gaze. "Jason, I'm serious. I need space." He nodded slowly. "Okay." She took a sip of her coffee. "Are you seeing her today?" Jason stiffened. "No." Emily studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." She grabbed her bag and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. "I don't want to lose us, Jason," she said softly. Then she was gone. Jason woke to the smell of coffee. It was a familiar scent, comforting even, but when he walked into the kitchen and saw Emily standing at the counter, he felt anything but comforted. She was dressed for work, moving with quiet efficiency as she poured herself a cup. Jason cleared his throat. "Morning." She didn't look up. "There's coffee if you want some." The distance between them was unbearable. Jason walked closer, leaning against the counter. "Emily, about last night." "I don't want to talk about it right now," she interrupted. "Emily." She finally met his gaze. "Jason, I'm serious. I need space." He nodded slowly. "Okay." She took a sip of her coffee. "Are you seeing her today?" Jason stiffened. "No." Emily studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right." She grabbed her bag and walked toward the door. Before leaving, she paused. "I don't want to lose us, Jason," she said softly. Then she was gone. Jason was halfway through his lunch break when his phone rang. Mark. His stomach tightened. He stepped outside, answering cautiously. Hey, man. Mark's voice was sharp. We need to talk. Jason exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Yeah, I figured. Meet me in an hour. Click. Jason stared at his phone. He had known this was coming. Now he just had to face it. The bar was quiet when Jason walked in. Mark was already there, a whiskey glass in front of him. Jason sat down slowly. All right, let's talk. Mark took a sip of his drink, eyes never leaving Jason's. Are you in love with my wife? The directness of the question caught Jason off guard. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Mark scoffed. That's what I thought. Jason leaned forward. Mark, I swear, nothing happened. But you thought about it, didn't you? Mark's voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge beneath it. Jason clenched his jaw. It wasn't like that. Mark exhaled, shaking his head. Then tell me, what was it like? Jason hesitated. I don't know. We just connected. Mark let out a bitter laugh. Connected. He took another sip of his drink. That's what you call it. Jason felt a surge of guilt. Mark, I would never. But you did. Mark cut him off. Maybe not physically, but emotionally. You crossed a line. And the worst part, I didn't even see it happening. Jason swallowed hard. Mark leaned back, eyes dark. So tell me, Jason, what do we do now? Jason didn't have an answer. Because for the first time, he realized he had no idea how to fix this. And maybe, just maybe, it was already too late. Jason didn't answer Mark's question right away. He couldn't. Because what do we do now? Wasn't something he had thought through. He had spent so much time denying that anything was happening, convincing himself that his connection with Anna was harmless, that he hadn't considered the consequences. But now, staring at Mark across the dimly lit bar, he saw it all laid bare. The anger, the betrayal, the hurt. Mark wasn't just asking what they should do next. He was asking if there was anything left to salvage. Jason took a slow breath. I don't know. Mark scoffed, shaking his head. That's not good enough. Jason clenched his jaw. What do you want me to say? That I regret talking to Anna? That I regret whatever the hell this is? Mark's eyes darkened. Do you? Jason hesitated. That was the problem. He didn't. Not completely. He regretted the hurt it was causing, the way it was unraveling both their marriages, but the connection itself, the moments with Anna that had made him feel seen, understood. He wasn't sure he could regret those. Mark exhaled sharply. That's what I thought. Jason ran a hand down his face. Mark, you need to cut it off. Mark's voice was firm, leaving no room for debate. No more texts. No more coffee meetups. No more stolen moments. Jason swallowed hard. He knew Mark was right. This had to end before it spiraled any further. Before they crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But the thought of walking away from Anna left a hollow ache in his chest. Still, he nodded. Okay. Mark studied him for a long moment, then stood up. Good. And just like that, he walked out, leaving Jason alone with his thoughts. That night, Emily lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Jason was beside her, his breathing slow and steady, but she knew he wasn't asleep either. There was too much left unsaid between them. She turned her head slightly. Jason! He exhaled, rolling onto his side to face her. Yeah. She hesitated, then asked the question that had been clawing at her since the night before. Do you still love me? Jason's eyes widened. Of course I do. Emily searched his face. Then why does it feel like I'm losing you? Jason's throat tightened. You're not. But even as he said it, the words felt fragile. Like a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. Emily let out a shaky breath. I want to believe that. Jason reached for her hand, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't pull away. Maybe there was still hope. Anna sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. Jason's name was at the top of her messages, but she hadn't heard from him all day. And she already knew why. Mark had come home late, silent and cold. He hadn't confronted her, hadn't accused her of anything. But the distance between them had stretched even further, and that scared her more than anything. Because if Mark was shutting down, it meant he was preparing for something. Anna's fingers hovered over her phone. She wanted to text Jason, to ask if Mark had spoken to him. But she already knew the answer. Instead, she typed something else. "This is the right thing to do, isn't it?" She hesitated, then hit send. Minutes passed. No reply. And that silence told her everything she needed to know. This was the end. Or at least, it was supposed to be. But something deep inside told her it wasn't over yet. The silence between him and Anna was heavier than he expected. He had promised Mark that it was over, that he would cut it off, and technically he had. He hadn't responded to her message. He hadn't reached out. But that didn't mean she wasn't on his mind. Every hour that passed without hearing from her felt like a test of willpower. It was strange how someone who had once been nothing more than a friendly acquaintance had become so essential, like a thread in the fabric of his daily life. He told himself it was for the best. That distance would fix everything. But then why did he feel like something had been torn away? That evening, Emily made an effort to reconnect. She came home earlier than usual, set the table with his favorite dinner, and even played the old jazz album they used to listen to when they first got married. It was a clear sign, a peace offering, and Jason wanted to reach for it. But as they sat across from each other at the table, every attempt at small talk felt forced, like a performance rather than a real conversation. "So work was okay today?" Emily asked, her voice lighter than usual. Jason nodded, taking a sip of his water. "Yeah, just the usual." A beat of silence. Then Emily put down her fork. "Jason, I need to ask you something." His stomach tightened. He knew what was coming. "Are you sure you're okay?" He hesitated just a second too long. And in that tiny pause, he saw her face fall. She already knew the answer. Jason forced a smile. "I'm just tired." Emily didn't press further. She just nodded, looking down at her plate. And somehow, that hurt even more than if she had accused him outright. Anna sat in bed, scrolling mindlessly through her phone. It had been 2 days since Jason's last message. 2 days of waiting, of wondering if he was thinking about her the way she was thinking about him. She knew it was ridiculous. She was a grown woman, not some teenage girl caught up in a crush. But the truth was undeniable. She missed him. She missed the way their conversations flowed so easily, how he understood things about her without her having to explain. And now, all of that had been cut off. Her marriage to Mark had become eerily quiet. No arguments, no accusations, just nothing. That should have been a relief. But instead, it felt like waiting for an inevitable storm. That night, when Mark climbed into bed beside her, she expected him to turn away as he had the last few nights. But instead, he surprised her. His hand brushed against hers. A simple touch, one that, months ago, she wouldn't have thought twice about. But now, it sent a jolt through her. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze in the dim light. There was something searching in his expression, something she couldn't quite read. Mark swallowed hard. "I don't want to lose you." Her breath caught in her throat. He knew. Maybe he didn't know everything, but he knew enough. And yet, here he was, reaching for her instead of walking away. Anna felt the weight of guilt pressing down on her chest. She had been so focused on what was missing between them that she hadn't seen the way Mark was trying to hold on. Slowly, hesitantly, she turned her hand over, letting her fingers lace with his. "I don't want to lose us either," she whispered. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. Mark lay awake long after Anna had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling. That moment, the way she had taken his hand had given him the tiniest sliver of hope. But hope wasn't enough. Something had changed in their marriage, and no matter how much he wanted to pretend things could go back to normal, he knew they couldn't. Not unless he found the real source of the problem. So the next day, he did something he never thought he'd do. He picked up his phone and sent Jason a message. "We need to talk." Jason's response came quickly. "I thought we already did." Mark exhaled sharply. Not about Anna. About Emily. There was a long pause. Then, where and when? Emily sat at her desk at work, rereading the same email 3 times without absorbing a single word. Something was wrong. Jason wasn't acting like himself. Even though she hadn't caught him in a lie, she could feel the distance between them. And the worst part, she was starting to wonder if the problem wasn't just him. Maybe it was her, too. Maybe she had been so focused on keeping their life functional that she had forgotten to actually nurture their relationship. She thought back to the early days of their marriage, the spontaneous dates, the nights spent talking for hours, the way Jason used to look at her like she was the only person in the world. Had she let that slip away? Or had Jason simply found that feeling with someone else? The thought sent a sharp ache through her chest. She needed to know the truth, even if it hurt. Mark and Jason met at a coffee shop on the other side of town, where they were unlikely to run into anyone they knew. Jason had expected anger, accusations, maybe even a fight. But Mark didn't look angry. He just looked tired. Mark stirred his coffee absent-mindedly before speaking. "Emily called me last night." Jason stiffened. "Why?" Mark exhaled. "Because she's worried about you." Jason ran a hand through his hair. "Mark, I need to know something." Mark leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "Is it just Anna?" Jason's heart pounded. "What are you talking about?" Mark held his gaze. "Have you ever felt this distance with Emily before Anna came into the picture?" Jason opened his mouth to argue, to insist that nothing had been wrong before. But he stopped himself, because deep down he knew the answer. The truth was, his marriage had been unraveling long before Anna. Maybe she had just made him realize it. Mark nodded slowly, as if he had just confirmed something for himself. "I don't think this is just about Anna and me, or you and Emily. I think both of us have been ignoring what's wrong in our marriages." Jason clenched his jaw. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe this isn't just about cutting things off." Mark's expression was unreadable. "Maybe it's about figuring out why we got here in the first place." Jason leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. This wasn't the conversation he had expected, and yet it was exactly the one he needed. That night, Jason sat in his car outside his house for a long time before finally going inside. Emily was sitting on the couch, waiting for him. She looked up as he walked in, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't look angry. She didn't look suspicious. She just looked ready. "Jason," she said softly, "I think we need to talk." Jason swallowed hard. So did he. Jason sat down across from Emily, feeling the weight of the moment pressing on his chest. The living room, once a place of warmth and familiarity, now felt like neutral ground somewhere between comfort and confrontation. Emily's fingers twisted together in her lap, her face calm, but her eyes filled with an exhaustion that Jason had never seen before. "I need you to be honest with me," she said softly. Jason's stomach tightened. "I will be." She let out a slow breath. "Are you in love with her?" The question hit him like a punch. Emily wasn't asking if he had feelings. She wasn't asking about the details of what had happened between him and Anna. She was asking the question, the one that would determine everything. Jason's first instinct was to deny it, to tell her that he wasn't in love with Anna, that it had been nothing more than a mistake. But the truth wasn't that simple. "I don't know," he admitted finally. Emily's expression didn't change, but he saw the way her shoulders tensed ever so slightly. Jason rubbed his hands together, his voice quieter now. "I care about her, more than I should." But he shook his head. "I don't know if it's love or just something I've been missing." Emily looked away for a moment, pressing her lips together as if she were holding back words that wanted to escape. Then she met his eyes again. "And me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jason's heart ached. "Of course I love you." Emily swallowed hard. "Then why do I feel like I lost you months ago?" Jason had no answer for that, because deep down, he knew she was right. Their marriage had been crumbling long before Anna entered the picture. The question was, could they still fix it? Anna sat on the edge of the bed, her back straight, hands gripping the fabric of her dress like it was the only thing holding her together. Mark stood near the window, arms crossed, staring at nothing. The silence between them stretched unbearably. Finally, Anna spoke. "I know you know." Mark let out a slow exhale but didn't turn around. "Yeah." A sharp pain shot through Anna's chest. There was something devastating about his calmness, about the fact that he wasn't yelling or demanding explanations. She almost wished he would yell. At least then, she'd know what he was feeling. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. Mark let out a quiet, bitter laugh. "I believe you." That stung more than she expected. She shifted slightly. "Does that mean you can forgive me?" Mark finally turned, his eyes unreadable. "Forgiving isn't the problem, Anna." Anna's breath caught. "Then what is?" Mark walked over, stopping a few feet away. The problem is that I don't think you know what you want. Anna's stomach twisted. I want us to be okay. Mark studied her for a long moment. No, you want that. Anna opened her mouth to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because deep down, she feared he was right. Jason wasn't surprised when Mark called him the next afternoon. He had been expecting it. Meet me, Mark said, his voice tight. Jason didn't ask where. He already knew. When he arrived at the same coffee shop where they had met last time, Mark was already there, arms crossed, a storm in his expression. Jason sat down, bracing himself. So, where do we go from here? Mark exhaled sharply. I don't know. Jason nodded, staring down at his hands. I told Emily everything. Mark's eyes flickered with something surprise. Maybe. And? Jason let out a breath. She's hurt, but she wants to try.